The Valley of Waihee, a dark valley filled with dark memories of another time, a time of strife and struggle. They're still mining gold in Waihee. Not much, it's true, but just enough to make it pay. 30 or 40 years ago, it was cheaper for the companies to dig gold here than it was in South Africa, where they used coolie labor. The little gold train still rattles through the town, and the main street hasn't changed very much with the passing of the years. The local newspaper still functions in the same building and is just as conservative as ever. Around the corner is the old police station. Once it was the center of the strike-breaking and the thuggery. Today, the grave of Frederick George Evans stands as a permanent record of the brutality of the bosses. Evans was killed by a policeman's baton behind the old miners' hall. Some of the people who led the Waihee strike are still alive. Here's one, old Charlie Opie.
It's just 37 years since the Waihee strike. I was on the strike committee. Bill Perry was president of the union. Naturally, I got to know Bob Simple and Peter Fraser well then. Those were the days when they were close to the workers. They also helped and led the workers in their struggle for a greater share of the country's wealth and towards socialism. The Waihee strike was started by the government and the bosses, trying to cut wages and forming a scab union. We had to strike to maintain our conditions, not just to improve them. The same thing happened, I remember, in the maritime strike of 1913, when they took from the shipwrights their travelling allowance. That's what caused that strike. The same thing is happening now as happened then. And if the Labour government allows a scab union to be formed in Auckland or anywhere else, then they are doing the same as the Massey government done in 1912 and 1913.
Auckland, the largest and richest city in New Zealand. It's a city of contrasts, of the wealthy few and the many who work, of the big monopolies and the fighting trade union movement. There is not one Auckland, but two. Let's look at them both for a moment. First, the Auckland of the businessman, of the Chamber of Commerce, of private enterprise. How are they making out these days after so many years of bondage under the Labour government?
Company profits at the end of the financial year indicate favourable trends. Bruce Woolen Mill's net profit £23,296, reserves 96,260, Wright Stevenson's net profit 68,854, reserves 318,393, Farmers Trading Company net profit 76,504, reserves 361,865, Woolworths net profit 149,972, New Zealand Breweries 167,139, reserves 300,000. In 1941, total net company profits amounted to 11.5 million, and in 1948, 31.5 million.
But let's forget the odd $500,000. Where does the rest of this money go? Well, for example, Mrs. Fogglesby, an occupant of one of these humble dwellings, is just fresh back from a simply glorious 12-month trip to Europe.
My dear, Paris was wonderful. The clothes and the hats, and you mustn't see the word, but I almost had an affair d'amour in Paris. And the food, it was simply wonderful, though terribly, terribly expensive. And there always seems to be lots of strikes and things, but I did have a simply marvellous time. You should go as soon as you can, my dear, but by yourself, if you know what I mean, of course.
And there's that other Auckland, the Auckland of the workers, the toilers, living in the shadow of the gasometers and the factories. And they're living a world away in the same city. True, some of them do have state houses, but most haven't. And the struggle to make ends meet seems endless. But according to a newspaper editorial,
the so-called workers are benefiting at the expense of the rest of the public. Strikes, instigated by communists for the most part, cause great hardship and discomfort to the community and seem to result in few gains for the workers themselves. A firmer attitude must be taken towards those industrial groups who see fit to bring the law of the land into contempt and to flout common decency. It is the duty of the government, with the assistance of moderate trade union leaders, to enforce the appropriate laws and see to it that those workers who are the dupes of the communists and the so-called militants are made aware of some of the economic facts of life.
well, let's have a look at the economic facts of life. The official statistics issued by the New Zealand government statistician on the distribution of the national income. No one will argue about these figures. In 1938, the wage and salary earners received 55.8% of the national income. But in 1948, they received 47.8% of the national income. In other words, there was an 8% loss. As far as workers were concerned, in their share of the national income, that 8% represents £34 million. £34 million are needed to make up the loss. £34 million should go back into the pockets of the workers. Divided by the number of workers, £34 million means about another 30 shillings a week. 30 shillings a week to get back to the 1938 level. But how about making some progress? After all, we've got a Labour government in power and have had since before 1938. To make progress, to give the worker something like a fair deal, an increase immediately is needed. All right, but what happened to the Auckland carpenters at the end of 1948?
Did you read in the paper this morning where the arbitration court has taken our travelling allowance away?
You bet I did. And here we are sticking out for £2 a week rise.
Yeah, or even the Federation of Labour reckons that £1 a week rise is fair enough. And the way things look to me now, we're going to lose about £1 a week instead of getting some more.
Well, I don't know what my wife's going to think about it when I really explain what all this means. As it is, she's always growling about how things cost more each week and how hard it is to make ends meet. Not that I blame her.
Well, boys, I remember years ago listening to old Harry Owen calling the arbitration court the leg iron of labour. And by George, he was right too. For here we have a Labour government using the court against the best interest of the workers of this country. Labour government. I don't know what you jokers think about it. As for me, I'm a man that's been voting Labour all my life, but I'm not going to put up with this lot. What do you reckon?
The reality of the arbitration court's ruling became clear to the carpenters. They began to realize they were being taken for a ride.
In view of the struggle of our members over the years to maintain and increase their living standards, the unjust decision of the arbitration court refusing to recognise reasonable wage increases and the fleecing away of hard-won conditions will not be tolerated by our members further. If we compare the living standards of 1938 with those of today, it will be found that in spite of record profits, the living standard of the workers has deteriorated. The role of the arbitration court has been to hold down the living standards, and in the case of the carpenters, actually reduce the standard of living of our workers. This must be challenged by the whole of the trade union movement.
Don't you think we should accept the arbitration court's decision, not embarrass the Labour government?
What do you mean, embarrass the Labour government? Won't you be embarrassed when you take home a smaller pay envelope?
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to move that this job meeting recommends to the Executive to take drastic action in this matter.
I'll second that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Well, chaps, you've all heard the resolution. Are there any further speakers? If not, I'll put the motion. All those in favour, raise the right hand. Carried unanimously.
Resolutions poured into the Auckland office of the union, and it was decided to institute a go-slow policy against those employers who followed the court ruling by cutting the travelling time. Then the master builders had their say.
Well then, gentlemen, I take it that we're now unanimous on this matter of mass dismissal of employees as a means of retaliation against the union's tactics. Agreed? I may say, just confidentially, that the government will take a favourable view of the policy we are now resolved upon.
Hey, Paddy.
Hello.
Well, Paddy, you're fired, boy. You finished tonight at 4:30.
What had he been fired?
Well, that's the score, Paddy. I've got no row with your work at all, but I've had my instructions from the Master Builders Association.
And I'm to go at 4:30.
That's right,
Doesn't
Paddy.
suit me, Mug. I'm going now at 2:30. Suit you?
That's right,
Good,
Paddy.
it's fair enough. I'm going now. You can stick it up your jumper, the whole lot of it, boots and boots and everything. Okay, with you?
That's right, Paddy.
Good.
Not only one man was sacked, but thousands. The master builders declared war against their workers. About a third of them had adopted a go-slow policy, but the other two-thirds were sacked as well, simply because they had supported the policy in principle of keeping conditions the way they were. But worse was to come. The sacked carpenters found that the Social Security Department wouldn't pay them the unemployment benefit. They found that the big employers wouldn't employ them. They found that government departments had them on the blacklist. They were faced with blank refusals and slammed doors. But two can play at that game. The workers can fight back. They can put the bosses on a blacklist too. The wharfies started the ball rolling. Among the major offenders in locking out carpenters from other work were the Auckland Glass Works at Penrose and the Southdown Freezing Works. So one morning when the call comes for work at the waterfront, the wharfies are a little more canny about what ships they work. The Kaimanawa? Yes, she's okay. The Sierra? Yes, she's okay. The Northumberland? Not in your life. She's as black as the inside of a cow and as dirty as a cargo of soda ash. And that's what she's got. Soda ash for the Auckland Glass Company. We won't touch her with a 40-foot barge pole, let alone a hook and sling. So the Northumberland lay alongside for a long time, but just as long as the Auckland Glass Company wouldn't take on carpenters. But it needs more than just one group of workers to beat a boss's lockout. Next, it was the turn of the railwaymen. Cargo for the Southdown Freezing Works? We'll soon fix that. Freight for the glass works? But not for very long. Very easily blackened with a piece of white chalk. And behind that, the determined will of a lot of workers to see that the right thing is done. Now there's only one other loophole to be sealed up. The possibility of trucks bringing in stuff to the glassworks. Here's a truck carrying a load for the works. This driver hasn't quite got the score yet. But his union understands all right. They've picketed the company's gates just to make sure nothing gets through. The pickets mean business. On your way, boy, you don't come through here. No joke. Get going. The workers have answered. They've put the employers on the blacklist too. They've fought not for money in the pocket, but for the good old-fashioned working-class principle of sticking together, of not letting your mates down. Sometimes it isn't easy, but it's worth it. The trucks piled up on the stands. The companies didn't get their stuff. Just by way of a change, they started to lose money, big money, and it began to hurt.
We must deal with this business of declaring firms black, as it is called, in a drastic manner. The next move on our side should be the dismissal of all drivers. And by making one or two ships preference ships, we can effect the dismissal of the watersiders. I can assure you that the government will not interfere with us.
The wharfies were fired, and the ships began queuing up in the stream, many ships, and many men out of work. And just because they were determined that their fellow workers weren't going to be locked out and starved out. The workers decided to take time off to talk over the situation, to hear from their leaders, to see how things stood. They stopped work. The buses stopped running. Everything stopped. The main streets of Auckland were empty. The industrial life of a big city slowed to a standstill. The workers showed their unity and their strength, and they exercised it. 3,000 of them packed into Carlaw Park to meet, to listen, and to discuss. The police were also there. The gentlemen of the press, excluded from the meeting, took refuge in a nearby fowl house, keeping company with the black leghorns. Here, Jock Barnes of the Waterside Workers.
Fight of the Carpenters Union for increased wages is the fight of all unionists. But today we are faced with a bigger issue than wages. Within the memory of many living people is the American Civil War, a war that was fought to end the power of the Simon Legrees, a war that was fought to prevent slaves, men, women and children being flogged back to their masters. Today, in our more cultured form, we face the same situation. Workers, who, it must be remembered, have no quarrel with their employers, dismissed, denied the right of work, and flogged back or attempted to be flogged back with the economic whip of starvation.
Eddie Taylor, Drivers Union.
Today, 800 members of the Drivers Union have received notice of the termination of their employment as from next Wednesday. This decision was arrived at by the Master Carriers Association, not because the drivers were not good slaves, but because they, the workers, had the audacity to say to their masters, you shall not starve a section of workers into submission, you shall not boycott members of the Carpenters Union. This is a basic trade union principle, which workers will and must fight to the end. And in conclusion, I don't think it could be a more fitting occasion than to quote those words of that famous trade union leader of Spain, La Passionera. Far better to go down fighting than to be forever on your knees.
Roy Stanley, Carpenters Union.
The decision of the Watersiders and the Drivers Union to apply a boycott against those employers other than builders has already had the effect of driving back the forces of reaction. But in order that we do this effectively, in order that the working class as a whole gain a victory, it is necessary that the whole of the trade union movement throw their weight in behind the National Council decision of full moral and financial support. If we lose, you lose. If we win, you win.
The workers decided to stand together, to fight back. So another tactic was tried by the bosses and the government. Mr. McLagan, like Hitler, has a habit of pulling his putches on a Friday afternoon. The Carpenters Union was deregistered, and on the following Monday it was announced that a new union had been formed. At its first meeting, master builders acted as doorkeepers. Among them were Messrs. Rose, Farmer, Hoy and Liddell. A few men did drift back to work, so union organizers went round to talk to them, to try to tell them the truth.
What do you chaps think that you're doing? You know the decision of your union not to return to work until our just demands have been met by the master builders? Well, the union won't stand for you chaps scabbing on your mates. Listen to me, you chaps. Knock off that hammering. You can't let your mates down. I appeal to you on behalf of the union to pack up and come off the job. Your mates are still holding out. They won't betray our struggle for justice. Look at it this way. For years now we have fought to increase and safeguard our conditions and rates of pay. Your action weakens the present fight against an injustice. Are you chaps going to allow all that has been won in the past to be lost overnight? Are you going to be the ones to sell us out lock, stock and barrel to the employers? You can't let your mates down. Think of their wives and children. The whole of the trade union movement is eagerly watching our struggle. We must win through, not only for ourselves, but for every unionist in New Zealand. You'll come off? Okay, I'll give you a lift into town.
To be an unwitting strikebreaker is one thing, to be a scab quite another. And the one or two jobs that scabs came to work on were declared black smartly. The scab is a curious creature. Like a rat, he has legs on his belly, he lives on leftovers, and doesn't come out of his hole when anyone's looking. But the scab has powerful friends, like the police, who are at the moment invoking the Watching and Besetting Act, passed by the Massey government in a significant year of 1913. The Carpenters Union faced a combination of enemies, the press, the politicians and the bosses. But they kept fighting. They kept telling their story through their own press. Unemployed carpenters reported each week at the union office for their sustenance money. Not much, but enough in the meantime. The workers all over the country have poured their money into the lockout fund. The miners on the west coast and the north, from the workers at Mangakino, from Auckland wharfies, from their fellow carpenters everywhere in Australasia. More than £12,000 came in, out of the pockets of thousands of workers. So who was right? The arbitration court or the workers? Well, we shall see. Many carpenters got themselves jobs either through their union or by their own initiative. Some started work on the waterfront as ship's carpenters. And those who couldn't work in their trade managed to get along somehow in other trades. It was tough going, but they stuck it out. And the master builders, how did they get on? Their attempt to break a union failed, and they lost £1 million. After 16 weeks of lockout, the big construction job still stood silent and empty, rotting in the weather. It's been a hard and bitter fight, but as usual, it was one the workers didn't start. It was provoked by that unholiest of unholy alliances, the arbitration court, the bosses and the government.
The struggle has not been that of the carpenters alone. It has been the fight of every decent person in New Zealand. I believe those who inspired this attack against workers had as their motive the smashing of the New Zealand trade union movement. A blitzkrieg against the carpenters, then the drivers, then the waterside workers. That was the master plan. But the plan has failed. It has been defeated because of the honesty of purpose and solidarity of the average New Zealand trade unionist. The lick spittles and time servers are exposed. Once again is written a chapter in accordance with the best traditions of the New Zealand trade union movement.
Roy
All
Stanley.
that the workers are demanding in the final analysis is peace and progress. At the 1945 conference of the World Federation of Trade Unions, at which I was the delegate from the New Zealand Federation of Labour, conference called upon the trade union movement of the world to strengthen and unite the forces of the trade union movement and to combat all those who would disrupt the forces of the trade union movement or of the working class. We in New Zealand must play our part in fulfilling this resolution.
Charlie Opie.
I'd just like to ask one question. Is the Labour government in league with the bosses? Or is it on the side of the workers? Because here we have a government helping to form a scab union, attacking the watersiders and carpenters just because they have good, honest leaders and not moving 1 foot towards peace and socialism. That's what the workers want, peace and socialism, not war and capitalism.
Freedom from fear, freedom from want, freedom to live a good life. And this has been the story of a struggle fought around just those issues. These are the facts, the simple facts. We have listened to the thoughts and feelings of the men who passed through this time. Mistakes have been made, but an error understood. Passions aroused, but unity strengthened. There have been losses, there have been gains, but the lessons have been learnt. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all has been learnt truly, that from unity comes strength. And it is struggles like these that shall reshape the world.